Fallingwater by Gabe, Kaden, Brian, and Justin.
Fallingwater was created by Frank Lloyd Wright and commissioned by Lillian and Edgar Sr. Kaufman. It is located in Bear Run Nature Reserve, Pennsylvania, and was created between 1936 and 1939. It is in the style of organic architecture and is in the movement of modern transcendentalism. It is made of stone, steel, concrete, and glass.
The house was meant to complement its height while still competing with the drama of the falls and their endless sounds of crashing water. The cantilevered tiers hang suspended atop the 30-foot waterfall. The main house uses 5,330 square feet, and the guest house uses 1,700 square feet. It costs $155,000 to build the house, and is surrounded by WPC's 5,000-acre Bear Run Nature Preserve.
And here we see the architectural layout of the house.
We see three terraces.
Lots of terraces.
All right.
Here we see a little bit of the construction site. Stuff such as the waterfall before the house was built on top of it, and sort of this infrastructure that they created to build the house. Right, it's a very layered house to create. So,
Wright constructed this house as a weekend home for his friends Edgar and Lillian Kaufman. This house was once a getaway for the employees who sought to clean their bodies from the pollution of the big cities. However, the employees could not afford to keep traveling as it was during the Great Depression. Now the house is used as a museum to honor Frank Lloyd Wright and his architectural masterpieces.
So this house, Fallingwater, it demonstrates leadership and creativity. It shows human harmony with nature, and Frank Lloyd Wright's ability to build without destroying what is around it. And like Gabe said, it's to preserve one of Wright's greatest works. It's a collection of most of his architectural concepts, and it displays the geometric clarity of architecture at the time, and a lot of other modern architecture. There's lots of curves, but we see, like in the picture on the right, geometric clarity, which is just shapes and houses, and it preserves the nature surrounding the site.
There are two houses, a main house and a guest house. The main house was constructed between 1936 and 1938, and the guest house was built in 1939. There is a waterfall in the Bear Run Nature Preserve, which the house is built upon, and there's 5,200 acres of hiking, fishing, and hunting grounds in the Bear Run Nature Preserve. There are ceilings ranging from 9 feet to 6 feet 4 inches, so they're very low. You could almost just touch the ceiling. All right.
If you could jump a foot, you could touch the ceiling. I think most ceilings today are 10, 11,
10.
10.
Yes.
I wouldn't know.
And here we see a couple pictures of Bear Run Nature Reserve.
And on the right, we see people preparing for a camp or a yoga session.
Yeah, and that's modern times, right?
Yeah.
Because it's in color.
Color.
Alright, so for the context, the Fallingwater house was commissioned by Edgar Kaufman Sr. in 1935 as a weekend residence for him and his family. This was in the middle of an economic downturn. The Great Depression hit both the Kaufman family and Frank Lloyd Wright very hard, since Edgar Kaufman Sr. was the owner of a department store. And in the picture to the right, we could see the Kaufman family themselves, Sr. to the left, Jr. in the middle, and Lillian Kaufman to the right. As I said before, Edgar Kaufman was a businessman. He was very wealthy throughout his life.
And it sort of goes to show that, like, in the Great Depression, how much they paid for the house. I think earlier you said Wright was paid $8,000, and then but this is like one of the greatest. It's a pretty big house as well, for only $155,000.
All right, so more about Frank Lloyd Wright. He was one of the most influential and greatest architects of his era. Lloyd Wright is also known for his development of organic architecture, which is shown throughout the house, and his prairie-style homes, which he did earlier, with the use of transcendentalist and European ideals, which we'll show later as well. Lloyd Wright created the Talesian Fellowship to provide learning environments for architectural apprentices, which he met Edgar Kaufman Jr. there, and that's how he became friends with the whole family.
And Frank Lloyd Wright, he was about like 65 whenever his career hit off, right? He was really old.
Right. Yeah.
So at the very beginning of his career, it was pretty stagnant. He didn't have much going on, and then he started building these new houses, like the prairie house style,
Right.
and then the Fallingwater house. There's also one in the desert, I believe. It was a school that he created.
Yeah, that was the Fellowship.
Right. So the Fellowship was sort of his school,
Yes.
and you can tell that his career didn't really start hitting off. I guess that makes sense because he's doing like contract work for houses, whereas like if you're famous right off the bat, like in the Renaissance times, you just get commissioned like to make churches and more churches, I guess. Wright's childhood, he was trained nearly from birth by his mother, who believed he would be a great architect one day. Guess that took a while to pay off. He's trained with Froebel gifts, which are basically 1900s version of Legos, as you can see on the right. And you see in that quote, he says, "For several years I sat at the little kindergarten tabletop and played with the cube, the sphere, and the triangle, these smooth wooden maple blocks all around my fingers to this day." So he clearly still remembers, and we can see in the blocks the sort of geometric clarity that's mirrored in his architecture, right? It's not free form. It's squares, it's rectangles, and like triangles. And she was a teacher, the mom, who basically designed a curriculum based on her wish, and she would hang up pictures of old cathedrals around Europe to sort of encourage Wright to get on the architecture track.
And if you think about it, the toys that Kaufman or Lloyd used, he used all those squares and the simple toys and the Legos. So we continuously evolved with still squares, and now we have Minecraft, which Justin's playing right now, where it's still squares. So throughout history, we still use squares, and we still have the fascination with just geometry.
Just building overall.
Right.
So what influenced Frank Lloyd Wright to create this building? So he was responding to the European modernist movement, which they based it off of basically him before he became famous. And what he wanted to do was one-up the Europeans because they took his style, because apparently he was a douchebag. And so they took all of his stuff and then made it their own, but not really made it their own, just made it taller. And so Wright drew inspiration from the balconies from the gropiest design for the Chicago Tribune Tower competition. So, yeah.
So he just stole his own idea back.
Yeah. So on the picture to the right, we can see how the terraces, I think you can see them really clear on the top levels. There's three of them. And you can see those terraces also in the Fallingwater, the three ones that like jut out from the building. And in his building, he also used warmer, more earthy tones to blend with the landscape.
Which is more congruent with his organic architecture style. He didn't want to make something that really stood out.
Yeah, so this is back to the balcony. It's just an example where you can see it better. So you can see the two balconies on the bottom, and you can see where the arrows are pointing, the 5 or so that are up top. So in the design, so this sketch was his original sketch, where he did it within like 2 hours. He was a procrastinator. He waited till they arrived.
Just like all of us.
Yeah. After receiving the commission, Wright procrastinated for 9 months until the day he was required to show the design for the Kaufmans. So it's kind of like us getting the test after 2 weeks.
Yeah, that was
and
an
procrastinating.
Sorry,
yeah.
Mr. Avenger.
So Wright managed to finish the entire design in 2 hours. So he did it. He was like, "Oh, they're arriving today," and he did it in his car. So it was used. The medium he used was colored pencils on tracing paper, just average architecture stuff. Well, it's pretty detailed for a sketch, though.
Yeah, I think it looks pretty good.
This is more of a fun fact. We aren't really sure. This is just word of mouth, so you know. But it's a good bit of information, I guess.
And here we see, as Justin referenced, Wright's architectural style. So it's organic architecture, which is something that he greatly influenced but didn't create, and prairie school architecture, which is something he created, is basically his own form. Very marked by horizontal lines like we see in Fallingwater, and all these houses, particularly the second and third ones we see, very flat horizontal lines throughout the house. Drew from organic architecture, which really emphasizes the use of nature, as did prairie school. Is sort of like a prairie a prairie house would. It sort of blends into the landscape around it. And also a little bit of modern architecture. They're very polished. They look nice. They look new. It's not so much wood anymore as concrete. And they're polished but angular.
They almost appear to be sunken into the environment. Right. So they appear to like actually be coming from the environment, like they were already there before the Frank Lloyd Wright built them. So as opposed to some other buildings like the Monticello house, where it's just like there.
So it's integrated into the environment. Alright, for the organic architecture, Lloyd Wright's philosophy of architecture was pertaining to the harmony of human interaction and the natural world. He incorporated the natural world into the Fallingwater house, as we could see. He built the house on top of the waterfall, and he changed parts of the design to accommodate for the naturally existing obstacles, which we'll see later. In addition, we could see that Lloyd Wright wanted the Kaufmans to truly experience nature and its surroundings by having open windows and having an overall open house.
Yeah, plus all of the sounds that you can hear throughout the house.
Yeah, in the picture on the right, you can see the big open windows, how it's not just one big glass pane, it curves, or it goes to the corner.
Turns.
And then you can also see the organic materials he used, the rocks on the wall and the wood and the furniture.
And just the color inside of the house.
We can see how close it is to the environment and to the trees.
It's actually interesting because it looks like the inside of the house even sort of looks like it blends in with the outside.
On this slide, we can see how Lloyd Wright built around the natural environment, preventing any damage in the future. How his organic architecture beliefs went into the design. As we can see in this slide, the waterfall is directly below the house, and it is extremely close, and the natural world is right beside it. In addition, the material of the house highlights the rocky landscape and the boulders beneath it.
On that last slide, it looks like you can walk right into the river, actually, because the waterfall is right behind there, and you can walk right into that. That's
nice.
All right, so the Transcendentalist movement, it stems from Wright's organic architecture, which is basically is the building incorporated into the environment smoothly, or is it just built on top? So Wright said, can you say when your building is complete that the landscape is more beautiful than before? So he's just trying to say, is your building ruining the environment? Or are you trying the best that you can to preserve it?
Right, and then there's what was that piece that we did for the FRQ? It was a good example of modern architecture without organic architecture.
Villa
Savoy, yeah.
Yeah, the Villa Savoy.
The Savoy, it's the same angular geometric, but it was
it
white on
green. It was
green.
completely white, and then the plot of land was also extremely cleared out. It was just turf, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Very different take on how to
all
build.
All the trees have been cleared. You can just see them in the background.
So it when put up against Frank Lloyd Wright's organic architecture, there's a very stark difference. And then so like we've been sort of referencing throughout the presentation, he used a very organic palette for most of his works, because we saw that in his other houses too. And like we just said, it's a lot different from regular modern architecture. You kind of see, even around in Houston, you see the contrast between gray and green. But Frank Lloyd Wright used not really green, but colors that complemented green and the nature around it. Right. He used a color palette that only reflected colors found in nature. So I'm pretty sure all of the colors in Falling Water you can find in nature. It's not anything too unnatural. For Falling Water specifically, he only used soft colors like Cherokee Red and Light Ochre. And these were specifically made to be environmentally friendly by PPG Paints. And they now have a series based on Falling Water, its color, and the nature around it.
Yeah, for most of modern architecture, we can actually see that buildings like to stand out from the environment. But I guess that's due to them being placed closer to other buildings and not being put out in nature. So they don't really need to try to complement nature or its environment at least.
On the color palette, one of my neighbor's houses is blue. So it's like the modern houses that we have now is really different from what he believed. So
Right.
he tried to incorporate everything that he was like, the house, the materials, the paints. He tried to blend everything in, where now there's pretty much very little environment left to where there's trees. So
Right.
now we just have houses
Yeah.
sitting next to houses, so there's no need to blend it in.
I think like modern architects sort of want that distinction from the other. It's no longer from the environment; it's from like the houses around it. So, but I think Frank Lloyd Wright was very skilled in his ability. He didn't need to make it like a really bright color for it to stand out. He did that through his architecture instead, right?
The building right now, currently the Fallingwater residence was designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It acts as a museum and conservancy.
It's an apes reference.
Yeah, apes reference, which attracts nearly 150,000 visitors a year. However, engineers and architects have created a system to avoid a complete collapse of the building, which we could see in the picture to the right. We could see tarps and then the building underneath to try and fix it. Here are some more pictures of the inside and then the outside of the Fallingwater house. We can see how close nature is and how Frank Lloyd Wright incorporated all of that into the building itself.
And here we can see the color of the furniture is also quite like subtle, and how low the roofs are.
Yeah, I feel like you could jump and hit your head on that roof.
I probably could.
Yeah, that's a really low roof, but it's kind of nice. Like there's even on the interior.
Ceiling.
All right, so restoring the cantilevers. So the cantilevers are the long iron pipes, basically, that go through the balconies underneath the floor. So the cantilevers help prevent the roof or the balconies from sagging over time. So over time, due to lack of support, in 2001, it sagged almost 7 inches of the 15-foot cantilever, and 15%.
Almost 7 inches of the 15 foot.
Almost 7 inches of the 15-foot cantilevers had fallen. And that's a really big deal. So, because the big old balconies weren't just balconies, they're also part of the roof on each level or the ceiling. And the steel cables were attached to 3 of the 4 steel beams holding up the balcony of the living room. So if the living room falls down, which was the main like attraction of the building, you pretty much ruin the building, because if that falls, everything falls.
And the ceiling is already so low.
Yeah.
So it'd be very noticeable.
And an attempt to try and fix this, what they did was they tightened these cables. And so they stretched from the end of the balcony to the part of the main structural part of the building. And what they did was they just tightened it into the building more to hold it up. This image just shows how they tightened it. So they just pulled it towards the building. And then the cantilevers are the massive beams that protrude from the main building. These structures are only anchored by one end. So it's really easy for them to sag. And then it's just a balcony is just accessible structure extending from the building. So just the balcony is the top part of it, basically.
And then we're gonna talk about how Frank Lloyd Wright was trash.
Yeah, straight douche.
Does anyone remember?
Yeah. There were a lot of things.
This goes back to whenever Europe stole his style, because they're like, you're a douchebag, because he was going around Paris for a while.
Right. So, this is just in. Frank Lloyd Wright was not a good person.
There was a mass murder in his house, right? There's 8 people were killed.
Thank you, Mr. Avenger.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr.
Not
Avenger.
so fun fact.
If you want to go look up how bad of a person he was,
You can enjoy that.
yeah, you go do that.
Yeah, just look up Frank Lloyd Wright, bad person, and click on the first link.
Don't look up fun facts; they won't pop up.
Yeah.
It's not a fun fact. It's actually kind of fun though. Lots of death.
Okay. All right. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
This is the
AP Art History Head Squad. We out.
we out.
We out.